I think Call of Duty just created a weapon specifically for Warzone, and this is the TAQ Eradicator. You can unlock this by doing the weekly challenges in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 right now on either zombies or multiplayer. But this is a very unique weapon that seems to have been made almost entirely with Call of Duty Warzone in mind, and I guess really that it's no surprise that this gun is releasing a week before the release of Warzone. It's almost as if this is the lead-up weapon that they want you to unlock. So today I wanted to show you this TAQ Eradicator because it's a very unique weapon for a number of reasons that we're going to get into, and talk about the impending release of Warzone. Now, a lot of you guys have seen all of my previous videos about what I think you should unlock, what I think you should level up, and if you haven't, please do go check those out. But for the most part, the meta is going to be fairly open until we see certain trends emerge, especially in terms of how the gameplay is going to go, how the map will flow, whether or not the movement will make a substantial difference, which I think it will. So it's anybody's fair game and guess as to what's going to be super effective when Warzone releases. But this gun is very unique because it seems to take all of the qualities you would want from a Warzone weapon and pack it into one. So to start with, this thing has the mobility and general accuracy of something that's more like an assault rifle and less like an LMG. And even with its default magazine of 75 rounds, it's a fairly quick weapon. Not that mobility really matters for these things, considering you often will switch to a secondary SMG in a Warzone setting. But generally speaking, you do want something that can ADS quickly and be effective over range with a sizable magazine, and if there was a way I could describe this gun, it's as if the TAQ V had an LMG assault rifle hybrid and wasn't a battle rifle anymore. So at a very basic level, it just has the nice, sweet middle ground between a battle rifle and an assault rifle, or an assault rifle and an LMG, that automatically makes this weapon interesting, because guns with high magazine capacities, with decent mobility and ADS speed, are always desirable options in Warzone by default. But without any modifications or any changes, there's also some other unique parts of this weapon. To start with, it has a hyperburst, a little bit like the SVA 545, or for those of you who are familiar with the AN-94 from the Battlefield games of the past, it has an initial first shot or two that is hyperbursted at a higher rate of fire than the rest of the rounds that come out of it. But even more interestingly, not only does this weapon fire quicker for the first few bullets, it ends up firing slower for the rest of the rounds that leave the weapon, which inadvertently creates, potentially, the best Warzone scenario imaginable. The first couple of shots get off quickly if you're in a close range engagement scenario, or a close to medium range engagement scenario, but if you're trying to aim at somebody who is over range and quite distantly far, the rate of fire actually declines and goes down, meaning that the gun is more stable and generally speaking more accurate. Now the build you're seeing right now is me playing in war mode in multiplayer, which I put a 40 round mag on it and generally built it for ADS speed and stability, but you can really make this thing not miss a shot for the most part if you build it correctly. So I think a lot of you can see why I've said that this might be the first weapon I've ever seen which has been specifically created with Warzone in mind. The hyperburst means that it's going to be incredibly effective at close to medium ranges, and it takes about a second for that shot to reset. So you won't be able to spam the hyperburst consistently like you can with the 545, but after about a second you can use it again, which is a very interesting mechanic, and I don't think we've ever seen this in any weapon in any Call of Duty to date, really. I don't think we've had a variable fire rate weapon in pretty much any modern Call of Duty to memory, and especially not in Warzone. There's a really great chart here by the folks over at True Game Data, so a big shout out to them, where it shows that the rate of fire of this weapon can peak up to around somewhere around 950 RPM, and then ends up dipping off to in and around the 700 to 600 region. So you've kind of got this strange battle rifle LMG AR variant, which is highly mobile, has decent amounts of recoil control and compensation, has a hyperburst mechanic if you want to get your initial shots out quickly to take on some opponents, and then ends up being surprisingly decent over longer ranges because it has a slower RPM after a specific number of shots have been fired. And even then, the great thing about this weapon is that in Warzone, often when you lose track of a target, it takes about a second or so for that target to reappear if they're peeking you in and out of cover. So you will regain the hyperburst ability every single time you sort of pop in and out of an engagement, because it takes a second for that to come back for you to hit 950 RPM all over again. If you think about the traditional fights you have in Warzone, the medium range fights are decided by who can be quick hitting quickly and deal a lot of damage in a short window. The longer range fights are about who is more accurate, and some of the closer range fights are very much SMG dependent. But when you have the breakup of gunplay between medium and long range where people are dropping in and out of cover, it normally ends up being around about a second before you see a peak or re-peak, meaning this gun, literally in all senses of the word, has been designed for Warzone. Now, there are still some tricky variables with this weapon. For example, the slower RPM means in some medium to slightly longer range engagements, you're going to see a substantially slower time to kill as the gun slows down and the rate of fire decreases, although hypothetically you should see an increase in accuracy as well as your shots become more stable. But the only thing that could potentially make this weapon either incredibly good or incredibly bad is entirely dependent on its damage range. If it has really good damage ranges that are consistent and stay really high across all ranges, this could be a really promising Warzone powerhouse. If this is one of those weapons where the damage range peters off, it's a little bit more questionable. It could be one of those guns that hypothetically on paper could be good, but in reality isn't that great. If you're wondering whether this is something you should level up for Warzone or in time for Warzone, I honestly still think the answer is yes. Although there are lots of question marks about this weapon's performance, that's kind of the same across the board for everyone. There are a lot of weapons that look really good on paper right now in Modern Warfare 3 for the Warzone experience, but little details like recoil bounces or weapon damage range or damage drop-off can be defining factors in whether or not they're good or not. I'd say generally, just with the unique profile of this weapon, I think it is worth leveling up and unlocking. The uniqueness of how it fires, and the fact that it's got a 75 round magazine while still boasting decent movement, decent mobility, seemingly decent damage and recoil, means that I truly think this will be the all-round weapon for Warzone. This is one of the few guns other than the PKP Pulmiot 762 where I think this is a potential standout weapon that could end up being extremely powerful in the right hands. I honestly think the weapon profile having a 75 round magazine is pretty much reason alone for you to unlock this. My prediction with the new Warzone, with the better movement system and the faster movement, means that you're going to have smaller windows where you can actually fire on somebody effectively. People are going to be dodging bullets more, people are going to be dipping in and out of cover more, and the actual window you have to deal damage to an opponent is going to be so much shorter. So having high ammunition count magazines is going to be a huge feature I feel in this game. This gives you so much more breathing room in terms of actually being able to engage opponents, miss a couple of shots, and not feel like it's compromising your gameplay. This is one of the few weapons I see where you could take on a squad or 2 or 3 and potentially take out 2 or 3 of them in a mag. That extra round capacity is going to be huge, especially when you factor in the quicker movement speeds. Overall, I'd highly recommend giving this a go. It feels like this gun has been designed for Warzone, and I'd be very surprised if it didn't end up being one of the meta weapons from the jump. It's a very exciting possibility, and I think it's something you guys should look into. As always, folks, thank you for joining me today in this video. I appreciate you watching. Leave a like, leave a subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.